What's cooking, everybody? Dave Mays here with Kinotika, and today we're doing a top 10 of my favorite camera right now, the Nikon Z6. Before we get started, I want to say hit that subscribe button if you love gear and comedy. We're going to be posting every Wednesday and Friday starting now, so get ready for it. We've actually been shooting on the Nikon Z6 for video for several months now because my Canon EOS R broke. And this was our secondary camera that we were going to do a review on. We still haven't done a review on it. Believe me, we are going to do it. We've been meaning to. We're just very busy, so we're gonna do it soon, I promise. I picked up the Nikon Z6 on a professional shoot, and kind of for the first time, I actually used it in a professional environment, and I fell in love with it. I feel like this thing has a lot of pros for video shooters especially, and that's what we're gonna talk about today. So number one is handling. The handling on this camera is next to none. In fact, I would argue that this is probably the best handling I've ever felt on a camera of this size. This camera is really small, but it's got a great grip to it.
That's what she said.
And I have rather big hands, so it really molds to my hands nicely. There's this nice protrusion here for your thumb grip here. You've got this deep, deep grip here for your hands, and it just feels really comfortable. I also really like the way this camera is laid out with buttons and fiddliness, which is what our friend Gary always says on The Everyday Dad, fiddliness. The fiddliness on this to me is really great. The fact that we have this old switch that Canon used to use, ironically, for video and photo mode is great. It saves all your photo settings and your video settings and makes them completely separate, so that way when you're shooting video you can keep your shutter at 1/50th of a second, and then for photo you can have it different. The EVF is also really great and it looks really sharp. You don't have a flip screen unfortunately with this body, but you know, it's that Sony thing that just kind of flips out, and it's okay, it's nice. But yeah, I really love the handling, the way that this thing is laid out. That's number one. The second thing to know about the Nikon Z6 is the 4K modes. We have full frame 4K up to 30 frames per second with no crop. You heard me right. There is no crop on this camera. Obviously, cropping on the sensor is something that Canon is known for doing. The 5D Mark IV, the EOS R, the RP, the M50, all those cameras shoot a cropped mode of 4K, and it's not the end of the world because you can use different lenses to adjust for that. It just sucks that you're paying full price for a full frame camera and you're not actually taking advantage of the entire sensor. This camera actually comes in at $2,000, whereas the R is coming in at $2,200, so this is actually cheaper. We're getting full frame 4K with no crop. Even in 30 frames per second, we have no crop. Total full frame coverage in the 4K mode, and it is wonderful. The third thing to know about the Nikon Z6 is it has an APS-C 4K mode. In addition to the full frame mode, you can actually shoot in APS-C mode, which I find really useful because I'm able to use a lens like this, the 24-70, and actually crop in and go even further. It kind of turns it into a, I guess that'd be like a 35-105 or something like that. So it gives you just a little extra range, and you're still in 4K, so even if you're delivering in 1080p, you can crop in even more in post-production. It's great to have the ability to do that with the Nikon Z6, 4K in full frame and APS-C. The fourth thing to know about the Nikon Z6 is that it does shoot 120 frames per second, and it looks great. It's, again, nothing like a professional cinema camera. There is some image issues with moire, aliasing, stuff like that, but we have shot with it on this channel for Kinotika, and it looks pretty good. If you're using this camera for a high-end production and you want pristine quality, then I would definitely not use the 120 mode. I would go for like a cinema camera. But if you're just shooting for YouTube or even a wedding or something like that where it doesn't really matter as much the perfectness of everything, then the 120p is totally fine, and the slow-mo looks super sexy. The fifth thing to know about the Nikon Z6 is that the IBIS is actually amazing. If you're coming from a Sony camera like the A7 III, for example, it does have IBIS, but I found that the IBIS doesn't really work very good. And by the way, IBIS stands for in-body image stabilization. I think that Panasonic might actually own the rights to that word, so everybody uses a different word. I think Nikon calls it VC. I think Sony calls it something else. Whatever. I like to call it IBIS because I think it's the best way to describe it. Stabilization basically on the sensor itself. And I can use a lens like this, a 50mm that's adapted using an adapter here, and I actually get stabilization on an old vintage lens like this. And it looks amazing. Having stabilization that is smooth, almost gimbal-like, is so handy. And the fact that a full frame camera is able to do it at this size too, look how small this is pretty amazing. The sixth thing to know about the Nikon Z6 is the fact that it can record in 4K 10-bit using the Atomos Ninja V right now. now. It is amazing to have this little monitor because not only do I get amazing focus peaking, exposure control, and super high brightness, but I can also plug in a hard drive here and record in 4K 10-bit. Once you shoot 10-bit on this camera with the recorder, you're actually able to shoot in a log format in log. You can't actually shoot log internally. I actually use an EOS HD profile to shoot log. We can link that below. I really do love the EOS HD profile. But for external recording, I do shoot log with the in-log setting because it's the true log and it's 10-bit. With this recorder right now, we're able to shoot 10-bit 4K full frame with stabilization on sensor. There's really nothing like it. I think if you're a filmmaker and you're buying the Nikon Z6, this is an essential purchase. But wait, there's more. The seventh thing to know about the Nikon Z6 is the fact that a raw video recording mode is coming soon with the Atomos Ninja 5. You heard me right, we can shoot ProRes RAW to be exact using the Nikon Z6 and the Atomos. This is truly revolutionary. There is nothing at all on the market at all that is able to do raw video at a full frame recording at under $5,000. The Atomos Ninja 5 with the Nikon Z6 comes in at under $5,000 with their filmmaker's kit. It's really incredible that we're able to do this. It's kind of a dream come true for me. We have everything that I've ever wanted. Autofocus for video, IBIS, 4K, RAW, full frame. It's so good. Nikon color science. It's all really amazing that we're able to cram all that in this. And if you don't take Nikon seriously, then you really need to reconsider and do your research, because if you look at the market, the Nikon Z6 with the Atomos Ninja with the raw recording that's coming soon is one of a kind. Nothing out there is doing this yet, and this is smoking. The eighth thing to know about the Nikon Z6 is that the autofocus for video is actually rather decent, but it's only decent because there are some issues with the autofocus for video, and I will get to that. The main thing that this camera can do really well for autofocus is face tracking. I do have the 24-70 kit lens. This is an f4 lens, and we use this lens for autofocus, and I find that the face tracking on this camera works really reliably. In fact, if you're a YouTuber and you're filming yourself a lot, I would totally trust this camera when it comes to face tracking. The big problem that we've found is that as soon as you start doing object tracking, for example, if I were filming this lens and I wanted to zoom in and get a track of that and just tap my screen to motion track to the autofocus, it kind of is a little wonky and doesn't actually do it very reliably. So in those moments, I will switch over to manual focus, get my focus peaking works great on here, and I can just get my shot and then switch back to autofocus when you're back to filming people. And overall, it does work 80% of the time. It's just not that 90 to 100% that Canon and Sony is able to do. So I hope that Nikon will update that with firmware. Autofocus for video, it's okay. The ninth thing to know about the Nikon Z6 is the card slot, which is XQD. If you've never heard of XQD cards, it's actually a design that Nikon and Sony have made together. It's the world's fastest card. Not really, it's just really fast. It's 440 megabytes per second. Super fast, really expensive, extremely inconvenient. What do I mean by that? Well, you can't really pick these up anywhere. You have to buy them on Amazon and B&H. You can't just go to Walmart or Best Buy or something like that to pick one of these up if you're in a pinch. You also have to use this little adapter here. It's a XQD card reader. I've got a modern MacBook, so I do have to use card readers all the time because there's no SD card slot in it anymore at all. But it's just annoying having to carry around a bunch of card readers. They're really expensive. They're not very convenient, but it's a very reliable card. I do like the ruggedness of it. It's super solid. It's way more reliable than an SD card. So I think overall, it's a good card. It's just kind of inconvenient. And once you buy all the cards and all the adapters, then you're fine. But you know, it's just more stuff you gotta buy. And the last thing to know about the Nikon Z6, number 10, is the lens lineup. The Z lenses that came out with the camera are very few. There's only, I think, 4 or 5 that are out right now. The thing that I really love about these lenses is how small they can actually be with this little travel mode, and just overall design and engineering of these is really great. It's compact, it's well designed, the autofocus works really good. There is no IS on any of these lenses because they're fully relying on the IBIS of these cameras, which I found to be really good. And one of my favorite features of the zoom lenses, this one in particular, is the fact that this is 24 millimeters here, and as soon as I want to travel, I can go into this little travel mode, and it makes the lens even smaller and more compact. One of my big problems with the Sony system is their GM lenses are just big and heavy, and it kind of defeats the purpose of shooting on mirrorless, which is kind of to be a little bit smaller at least than a DSLR. And with this lens on this body, the camera balances really good in the hands. The grip, like I said before, is really comfortable to hold hold. The fact that the lens is lightweight, it has this nice travel mode, is really great. I think this is the best kind of lens design I've seen on a mirrorless camera for full frame. So I hope to see more designs from Nikon. They don't have a ton of lenses right now. You can use the adapter, of course, to use any of the older Nikon lenses, and a Sony E-mount adapter is also coming soon, which will be really exciting. Imagine putting the Tamron 28 to 70-2.8 on this camera here. I think that's a match made in heaven if I ever saw one. So hopefully the autofocus works well and the IBIS works well with the Sony adapter, because that will be pretty awesome to put a G Master lens on a Nikon body. I think overall the Nikon Z6 is a better camera than the A7 III. That's really the main point that I want to get across. If you're starting from scratch, if you're shooting on a DSLR still, probably a Canon, and it's time to update to mirrorless, consider the Nikon system. The Nikon Z6 is around the same price as the A7 III, and even though everybody's shooting on Sonys right now, I do think that the Nikon has more bang for buck when it comes to video performance if you're in a kind of isolated situation. I say that because a lot of people are shooting on Sony cameras right now, and if you're working with other people who shoot on Sony bodies, then it might be better for you to shoot on a Sony instead of the Nikon. But if you're a YouTuber, if you're a content creator, if you're a filmmaker who wants to eventually shoot RAW, mess with 10-bit, then consider the Nikon, because there's really nothing like it. The fact that right now you can put an Atomos Ninja 5 on here and shoot 10-bit recording in 4K full frame with IBIS is amazing. Not to mention, we're gonna have RAW recording soon in the summertime, hopefully ProRes RAW with this camera of this size at this price point. There's really nothing like it, and I can't wait to mess around with the RAW recording. The Sony bodies just aren't doing this yet, and I honestly don't really see Sony doing it, even with their A7S III that is hopefully coming soon. I don't see them doing RAW because Sony sells cinema cameras. Guess who doesn't sell cinema cameras? Nikon. This is kind of their entry to the cinema world. They're just throwing everything at this camera to be as good as it can be for cinema shooters, and I love that because Nikon doesn't have any skin in the game when it comes to cinema rigs, cinema cameras like the C200 or the FS7. So hopefully we see more from Nikon. I think it's a worthy investment. If I had $3,000 and I was ready to get into a mirrorless system, I would strongly consider the Nikon Z6. Once again, I'm Dave Mays. We have been really bad at consistency on this channel, and we're hopefully changing that every Wednesday, Friday. See you next time.